e-commerce is still exporting. We tend to believe that it's somehow different from selling in more traditional ways, but the truth is it's the same thing. And of course, trading online is just doing business. So what are we covering off in today's session? We're going to look at finding your e-commerce fit, and then we're going to look at selling direct versus selling indirectly, getting your goods to your customer, and finally, we're going to touch on getting paid. Now, just a reminder that today's session is an introductory one. You'll find heaps more information on all today's topics, and then so much more in the soon-to-be available self-paced learning modules that you can access at your leisure in due course. So e-commerce, much like any other business model, isn't necessarily suited to everybody. And the truth is, every product is not suited to sell online. But e-commerce as a model, well, that's not necessarily the right way for you to go. And a lot of organizations seem to think that e-commerce is the easier way to go. So they plumb for that before they even really know what it is they're letting themselves in for. So at its most basic level, what is e-commerce? E-commerce, or electronic commerce, is the activity of electronically buying or selling products through online services or over the internet. Now, we might think that e-commerce is a relatively new thing, but the truth is that particular term was coined and first employed by Dr. Robert Jacobson, who was a principal consultant to the California State Assembly's Utilities and Commerce Committee way back in 1984. So it's the classic old adage, nothing new under the sun. So is e-commerce suited to you? First of all, important to remember that all the rules of doing business and engaging with customers still apply. All the ways in which you select a traditional market apply. Exporting online is still exporting. And that means you need to know your obligations under the law of the country to which you're exporting. Even if you are selling B2C, business to consumer, you still have to be aware of the regulations and the rules that govern products entering a particular country. You need to understand the duties and tariffs that apply to your product. And just because you're selling online doesn't mean that those duties and tariffs do not apply. So in South Africa, for example, all Amazon.com orders accrue duties and tariffs, and indeed GST, which makes them considerably more expensive than they might appear at first glance. You also need to be aware of any potential non-tariff barriers to entry, and you need to understand how to deal with those non-tariff barriers to entry. Now, if you'd attended the Export 101 session on barriers to entry, you'll have a lot of information about the sort of things you need to be aware of. You also need to know what logistic issues you may face. So, for example, you might have to have, by law, in-country warehousing operations in your target market. If you didn't know that before you started shipping, you could find yourself in a world of regulatory pain. Also bear in mind that when you're thinking about logistical issues, it's the entire logistical process you need to be aware of, including the last mile that gets to your customer's door. Whether you're selling B2B or B2C, that last mile can be an absolute kicker when it comes to getting products into the hands of your customer. Because if you're selling into a region or a country that has very remote locations, you might find it very difficult to breach that last mile. Bottom line, you have to do your homework. Selling online is no different from any other business model in that you need to be properly prepared before you seriously start embarking. And that means you need to make an informed decision. Market research, just as it is to any form of export, is critical to successful e-commerce. You need to know your target market, because if you know your target market, you know what motivates those buying decisions. It will help you choose the most appropriate location to which to start selling. It will also help you to determine the right product or service to offer, and it will help you to establish a pricing and indeed a sales strategy. So to be successful, you need to create a mix of the right product sold at the right price in the right place using the most suitable means of promotion. So part of that informed decision making is investigating the product and service demand. So do people in the market that you have earmarked as a potential actually want what you are selling? And if they want it, can they afford it? How great is the need? How large is that need? And can people afford your product? And then, even more importantly, if there is a great demand for what you are selling, can you meet that demand? All too often, businesses are actually hampered by their success if they were not properly prepared for that success. So think about it. If you are targeting, for example, a market as large as China, and you get hugely successful and you have heaps of customers who want what you're selling, can you make enough to supply, or can you source enough? And not just the end product, but of course, everything that goes into your supply chain. You also need to think about the culture of the market in relation to the product that you're intending to market. You need to be comfortable that the culture fits your product in terms of things like religious beliefs, gender dominance, age-related beliefs. Are you selling a product that is aimed at a really young population? In which case, you probably do not want to sell it into a country with an aging population. If you are selling a product that is suited to a Western Christian-based demographic, you probably are not going to be very successful selling it into a Muslim country. So you need to think about all these things before you make that decision. Also need to think about the online appropriate marketplaces. So the marketplaces that you may have identified as the perfect ones through which to market your product, are they in fact available in the country that you're thinking about? Again, we turn our attention to a market like China. If you were thinking of selling your products through Facebook on China, you might struggle with that because Facebook is not available. You might have to consider an entirely different marketplace, and that may not suit your product. Think about distribution and promotion channels. Do they suit your needs, and do they suit your product and brand? You might have a product that has very specific distribution needs, and those may simply not be available in your target market. You might have to rethink the market based on where you can actually distribute. You have to bear in mind that your product needs to reach your customers in the same condition it left your warehouse. If you can't guarantee that, you have to rethink how you're going to do that. Also, promotion channels. You might be really comfortable promoting through Instagram, for example, but Instagram might not be accepted in your target market. Can you pivot to another promotion channel, or do you need to find a market where your preferred one is the norm? The competition, of course, is vitally important. Understanding that your competition is the local incumbent, it's other importers of products, it's other exporters of products, could be direct, it could be substitute products, and you have to understand their pricing, their distribution and performance versus what you plan to introduce. If the competitors in that market have some sort of overnight shipping policy because they are based geographically closer to the market than we are in Australia, you will really struggle to meet that overnight shipping. You might have to find another way to sweeten the deal for your customers, or choose a market that is easier for you to get your goods into. The government is very important. So by government, we mean, what are the barriers to entry, registration requirements, quotas, regulations, etc. And just because you are selling online doesn't mean that those do not apply to you. Of course, market metrics are important. So what is the size of the market What is the size of the market share potentially that you could hope to get? What are the characteristics of that market, the demographics of the market? Are there predominantly women in the market, predominantly men? Is it a young market? Is it an older market? Is it an aging market? Is it a very wealthy market? Is it a market that really doesn't have a lot of expendable income, but lots of people who can buy lots of cheaper products? Think about the market entry requirements. So some markets have entry quotas and very steep entry costs, duties on imported goods, even if they are sold via e-commerce. There may also be government controls on the import of certain products to protect local producers or manufacturers. And if that's the case, you will not be allowed to sell your product into that market. Think about those in-country logistics. So how are you going to move your product around another country? And how are you going to deal with delays, costs, storage issues? You need to understand that buyers want the same access to your product as they would from a local provider. They might make some concessions to you being in Australia, and therefore things take longer to get to them, but that will only go so far. They might settle for another imported product that they buy online from a supplier that is closer to them. Markets can be very fickle and customers can be very fickle too. So understand what it is that people expect of you in that market and whether you can actually provide. So the largest e-commerce markets, as typified by Shopify, and there's probably no surprises here. The largest e-commerce in the world today is China, and you can see the value there by US dollar. And of course, that's in the billions. The next is the US, followed by the UK, interestingly enough, which is not a market that we traditionally think of as a really large e-commerce market. And you can see the others there. Quite interesting to note that France is in that mix. Japan, which is not surprising, and Canada, Russia, Brazil, South Korea, and Australia. So you can see where Australia fits in the grand scheme of things. Australia is actually a relatively large player in that we import a lot of products through e-commerce. The largest e-commerce markets in terms of shopping penetration rates, again, China leads the pack, but only just. It's shown as the same as South Korea, but it's actually just marginally, fractionally higher penetration rate. And you can see how the penetration rates go down. Interestingly enough there, if you look at a market like Poland, where the e-commerce penetration rate is actually very high. And again, that's not something that we traditionally might have thought of as a market. The United States, of course, is a really large e-commerce market, but the penetration rate is not that high. Now, when we look at penetration rates, it means that there is room for growth. So when we look at a market like China, that is the largest e-commerce market, it's now sitting at 83%. How much more can it grow? Whereas a market like Thailand, that is sitting at 74%, has more room to grow potentially. And when we look at the greatest forecasted growth in online shopping until 2022, we see that the largest potential sits with India, followed by Indonesia, South Africa, Mexico, Turkey, and China. Because China has almost reached saturation point, China has less room to grow. And these are the sorts of figures and the stats that you need to take into account when you determine A, is e-commerce for me? And B, where am I going to target e-commerce markets in the first instance? It's not necessarily the biggest, it's the fastest growing. Now, if you're thinking seriously about e-commerce, you cannot go past the return on your investment and potential market share. So when we think about ROI, or return on investment, calculating the expected return on investment from an e-commerce market is really as much an art as it is a science. At the most basic level, you're estimating how many people want what you're selling, how many of those people can buy it, and how many people would choose you over a competitor. That's going to give you a sense of what the return on your investment is going to be. When we're thinking about market share, as a guide, you need to determine the competitor share in your target market, or use a discounted version of your home market share. The share estimate helps you to estimate your market potential with a more sophisticated calculation, which you can see on the screen. Market potential is considered to be the total number of potential customers multiplied by the market share, multiplied by the average selling price, and multiplied by the average annual consumption. There'll be more information on how you calculate ROI and market share in the online self-paced learning modules. So let's now look at selling direct versus selling indirectly, because of course that plays into whether e-commerce is ready for you and whether you are ready for e-commerce. So first of all, selling direct. If we look at selling direct is simply selling through your own website. That means there is no middleman, it is you. You set up a shop front on your website and you sell through that shop front. So it's actually just the virtual version of a bricks and mortar shop. Before you make a decision that you're going to sell direct, you need to answer all the following questions in the affirmative. So, is your website e-commerce enabled and robust enough to cope with large volumes of traffic? Every website is not necessarily an e-commerce website. If yours is not ready for e-commerce, it is just going to cause you grief. And if you are very successful, you need to be able to cope with large volumes of traffic 24 hours a day. Does your website run properly on multiple devices? You cannot have just a great functioning desktop site. Your site needs to run equally well, if not better, on mobile devices, mobile phones, things like tablets, etc. If your site is not properly mobile enabled, you will lose customers. Do you have a shopping cart set up? If people come to your site, they browse, they see something, can they actually buy it? Can they stick it in a cart and pay for it and have it shipped to them? Do you have a one-click checkout? You really do need a one-click checkout. First-time customers don't have a problem going through multiple steps to buy. Returning customers expect that they can just buy with one click. Do you use secure sockets layer, SSL? You need SSL authentication for web and data protection. If you don't have that, your site will not be trusted and people will not give you credit card and other payment details. Do you employ an address verification system? And this is very important for your own protection, because if you don't do this, there's a very good chance you could be scammed, you're going to ship goods and never get paid for them. Do you use tracking numbers for orders? You have to if you're selling through your own website. Your customers want a way to track what's happened to their goods, how long it's going to take to get to them, how much longer they have to wait, where it is in the chain, etc. Is your staff qualified to deal with customers and technology issues? Remember, when you're selling online, you're not just dealing with people, you're dealing with tech. And that means you need people on call 24 hours a day who can deal with website crashes, shopping cart failures, payments that don't quite work, gateways that go down, etc. Is your site securely hosted? If your site is going to be a proper e-commerce site, it needs to be hosted in an environment where it is as protected as it possibly can be in cyberspace. Do you have a disaster recovery plan? If something catastrophic happens and you lose your site, have you backed up all the data so that you don't lose your customer information, you don't lose any stored payment information, you don't lose information about stock levels, etc. You have to have a disaster recovery plan. Do you have an appropriate marketing strategy? And this includes display ads, shopping feeds, product ads on marketplaces, marketing through affiliate partners, etc. You need a proper digital marketing campaign if you're going to sell online. And very often that means you need to find somebody who does that for you as a service. Do you make use of search engine optimization? If you don't know what SEO is, clearly the answer to that is no. But search engine optimization is a very different beast today from what it was even a year ago. You need to understand how it works now. Now, if you've answered all those questions and you've come to the conclusion that maybe selling directly is not for you, you need to be selling through a third party. And that means selling indirectly. Now, if you're going to be selling indirectly on a platform through a marketplace, again, there are questions that you have to answer because you cannot just go with a knee-jerk reaction when it comes to selecting somebody. You need to understand, where do your target customers shop? If your target customers are shopping on Amazon, there's no point in you listing on eBay. You need to understand your customers. So how many competing products are already listed on the site you're considering? Does that mean your customers are enticed away from your product? Or does it mean that that is where they go to find products like yours, so they are far more likely to see what you have to sell? Of course, does the site have a good reputation? If it seems dodgy, chances are it is. How good is its market penetration? Does it actually reach the customers that you want to? And is the site positively disposed towards Australian products? If it is, they will make more of a song and dance about Australian products than if it isn't. And when you search for similar products, how well does this particular site rank in your search? Importantly, if you choose a platform, can you set up a page for your own business within the site? Or is it just a whole raft of products and people just search for a product? You might be happy with the latter, but you might insist on the former. Can you update your own product information online? And this is an important one, because if the only way you can get anything changed on the site, so new products added, change of price, new photographs, etc., is going through the platform and having them do it for you, there will almost certainly be a fee involved, and that could seriously affect your bottom line. I've had a question from somebody in the chat box asking, can you offer any comments on selling digital products online? The truth is, yes, but today's session is more aimed, Bill, at physical products. So perhaps you and I take this offline and we can have a conversation at some stage and possibly even exchange emails about that. So drop me an email and then we can talk about how you go about selling digital products online. And what would also be useful, Bill, is if you can let me know what sort of products you're thinking of, because of course the range can be pretty wide. So how well is the site marketed? Is it marketed online and offline? Because you really want to see that you are seeing reinforced messages offline. So do you see ads on television for this particular marketplace or platform? Do you see billboards? Do you see things in the physical realm as well as in the digital realm? Does the site have pricing rules and restrictions? And that's very important, because many of the sites do. They will effectively tell you how much you are allowed to charge for your own product, and they will restrict what you can sell on their site. If that's a problem for you, you should steer clear of those. What is the site's commission structure? And please, again, a lot more information will be available in those self-paced learning modules, but commission structures can be an absolute killer. It is never free to list on any of these sites, so bear that in mind. What other fees are charged? Are there ongoing monthly fees? Do they charge per transaction? And also, how long do they hold onto your money if they are taking your payments? Does the site allow you to discount your product through other online channels, including your own website? So maybe you've got a bit of a blended model going. You will find that if you are listing your product at a lower price anywhere, most of the platforms and marketplaces will automatically discount your product to the same level. They are not going to take a bump because you've discounted somewhere else. And in fact, they might have rules and regulations that say you're not allowed to. Do you have a marketing strategy to direct customers to your product on the site? Just because the site is there doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to promote your product. You still have to market your product. You have to market it as if you were selling it directly to drive traffic to your product on that site? And does the site have top-level back-end services? That's very important, and that includes logistics, customer service, technical support. What exactly is your money buying you? Now, we need to just make a distinction between platforms and marketplaces, because we tend to use them interchangeably, but they're actually not the same thing. So a platform is a business model that creates value by facilitating exchange between two or more interdependent groups, usually consumers and producers. Now, that's a fancy way of saying it's a bit of tech that makes you build your own site. A marketplace is actually a specific type of platform business model that focuses on facilitating exchanges between buyers and sellers. Two types of platforms: exchange platforms and market platforms, and marketplaces are exchange platforms. I'm just going to take another question quickly. Jackie asks, if selling directly, is there a recommended option for international freight? We're going to be getting to logistics a little bit later on in today's session. So just hang in there, Jackie. You might get the answer that you want, and if not, we'll take it from there. And yes, I understand your product is heavy, which of course has all sorts of implications for what you can and can't do. So e-commerce platforms. A platform is what you'll need to use to create your own fully functional online shop. So platforms include things like Magento. Magento is a very popular open source content management system, loved by millions of developers all over the world. WooCommerce custom development, designed for small to large e-commerce stores, and this is specifically if you use WordPress for your site. Shopify, which of course you've probably all heard about. Shopify is an all-in-one e-commerce platform for small and mid-sized businesses, and it can be integrated with Amazon and eBay, which is a very important component. It's geared at that small to medium-sized business, so you don't need to be an enterprise to build a site using Shopify. BigCommerce, very reliable, known for being really simple and easy to use and lots of fancy features. And Volusion is a cloud-based e-commerce platform, which is particularly responsive. Now, who uses these platforms? To give you a sense, Magento is used by Coke, Ford, Christian Louboutin, so large businesses. WooCommerce used by Singer, by Weber, by the All Blacks. And Shopify, interestingly enough, despite being available to small and medium businesses particularly, is actually used by some pretty big hitters. It's used by Tesla. Yes, you can buy a motor car online. It's used by Red Bull and by Penguin, but it's also used by almost countless smaller businesses who find it really intuitive and easy to use. So let's look at marketplaces now, assuming that you've made that decision that you're going to be selling indirectly and you're going to use the marketplace. The big three: Amazon, eBay, and Alibaba. So Amazon Marketplace, of course, is probably the most well-known marketing channel for online retailers. And for that reason, it's also one of the most competitive. You need to choose a plan, you need to create a seller account, and you need to upload your products. Of course, it's a lot more complicated than that, but at the base level. eBay, 182 million worldwide buyers. That's not a bad number of potential consumers. It's one of the biggest online retailers internationally, and it covers pretty much every category of product you can think of. Now, the great thing about eBay is it offers a quick start guide to help you start selling, and that's in 4 easy steps. You can create a My eBay page from which to answer questions and view sales information. It also offers free business consultation, a business efficiency guide, and seller development resources. Alibaba is China's e-commerce giant. What was once a startup, and we all know the story of Jack Ma, that employed only 18 people, now has over 22,000 employees. And they have a local office in Melbourne, which makes them quite accessible to us here. To sell on Alibaba, you need to register for an account, you need to establish your company profile, and you need to list your products. Again, it seems simple, but you have to know that it can take years to get established on Alibaba, and it can also be quite expensive. Of course, if you are selling handmade goods, one that I think needs to be thrown into the mix is Etsy. Etsy is geared towards crafters, artists, and collectors, according to their own blurb, and they like items to be categorized as vintage or supplies, specifically designed to sell handmade items created by the person selling the product. So I have a friend, for example, who crochets really beautiful handbags and other things. She sells through Etsy. She makes them, she sells them directly. To sell on Etsy, you have to create an account. You need to set your shop location and currency. You need to choose a shop name. You need to create a listing, set a payment method, and set a billing method. Now, for a lot more information on the platforms, the pros, the cons, the do's, the don'ts, the costs involved, you can find all of that in that online course when it becomes available. So do make a note of that and do think very seriously about skipping through some of the topics when they become available, because you will find a lot of information. Now, we had the question about how you get your goods to where you're sending them. Hopefully that question will be answered in this section. You've got to get your goods to your customer. Until you've got them in the hands of your customer, you haven't actually sold them. The little picture that you see there is taken in an actual warehouse. And of course, some of the large marketplaces like Amazon are delivering by drone in certain markets. So e-commerce logistics and the logistics model has changed dramatically over time because the way in which we sell, the method through which we get our goods to the hands of our customers has changed. So you can see there little diagram that gives you a sense of how it works. It's not rocket science, really. It's just following the steps. We're going to pause now on the difference between in-house versus 3PL logistics. So in-house versus third-party fulfillment. If you're doing it yourself, and the question we had earlier on was very much related to doing it yourself. Jackie, who wanted to know, is there a way other than using these parcel satchels? If you're doing your order fulfillment in-house, you handle all parts of the e-commerce order fulfillment process without seeking the help of any third-party solution providers. Now, at its most basic level and at its purest level, in-house fulfillment means you also put it in a truck yourself and you drive it. It, of course, is not possible in the case of third-party, or rather of overseas shipments. So if you are doing cross-border e-commerce where you are selling from Australia to a customer in another country, you cannot totally fulfill the order process in-house. Unless you have an aeroplane and you are loading it on the plane and flying it there, you are outsourcing some component of it to a 3PL provider. And that means that you are, if you are doing it yourself, handling everything from picking and packing to storing and managing to shipping, and also handling returns. Third-party order fulfillment, on the other hand, means that you outsource the retail order fulfillment process to a team of outside experts. This includes receiving orders, picking, packing, inventory management, shipping, warehousing, and returns. Now let's look at that in a little bit more detail. So there are three types of 3PL fulfillment. The first is the full service 3PL solution, where you hand over pretty much your entire logistics process to someone else to handle. They do it all. They store the goods and warehouse it. They send the goods, they pack them, they send them, they do everything that needs to happen, and they take care of all the documentation. A step down from that is warehouse and distribution-based 3PLs, where you still do everything up to the warehouse. From there on, the 3PL provider takes over. And then finally, and this is where most people that start out in e-commerce, cross-border e-commerce, start, and that is with transport-based 3PLs. So in the case of the package that you are now sending through Australia Post, but the product is too heavy to get there, you are using a transportation-based 3PL, and in this case, That transport-based 3PL is Australia Post. Now, the question we had was, if I'm selling directly, and is there an option other than Australia Post? Because the satchels are heavy, the product is heavy, therefore the satchel that it goes into is not very useful. It depends on exactly how heavy it is. Obviously, if it's over 2 kilograms, then the satchel's not going to work. If it's over 2 kilograms, there are also other rules and regulations that kick in, because then it becomes more of a traditional export shipment as opposed to a traditional e-commerce one that goes B2C because it's really lightweight. But we won't get into that now. In terms of where you can go, you might want to consider DHL. So any of the express carriers like DHL will have options that are not just Australia Post type satchels, and they are more geared towards handling heavier products and also slightly more problematic products. So products that need different handling, that you cannot just put in a satchel and hand to somebody over a counter or put in a post box. So I would suggest that you look at some of those other express carriers like DHL, TNT, and so forth. If you want to send me an email, Jackie, I can give you some pointers offline as to the sorts of providers you might look at. You'll find that they all have slightly different rules and regulations with in terms of who they will deal with, how you need to be set up to deal with them, and so on. But they do provide a different level of service. Australia Post through Star Express, Star Trek, also does. For a moment there, I was thinking about the television series, and I'm thinking, what am I talking about? Anyway, they have again a different level of service there, so that might also be a potential because they are considered more an express carrier than Australia Post is. Now, I hope that's answered your question on that one. So important to understand that if you're going down the 3PL fulfillment route, you've got these different ways of going, and it also means that there are different levels of responsibility that you essentially abdicate. And that also means that there are different levels of control that you give over. So the more services provided by the 3PL, the less control you have over your customers and your product. The lower the level of the 3PL service, the more control you have and the greater relationship you have with your customers because you control all of that stuff. So the 3PL, of course, is like any other service provider. You have to do your homework as to the sort of company that you want to deal with and whether the one that you've earmarked actually fulfills all those requirements. Make a note of this checklist because this is very important when you choose a provider. You need to understand their area of expertise. Not all providers are the same. Some specialize in certain commodities and products. So some might specialize in food products, for example. If you're a manufacturer and you're manufacturing things, they're probably not going to do what you need them to do. We're all thinking at the moment about COVID and vaccines and all sorts of other things. Part of the challenge with the COVID vaccines is finding a logistics provider that can deal with the conditions required by, for example, Pfizer. The Pfizer vaccine needs to be kept at an incredibly low temperature, and very few providers can do that. You also need to consider their credibility. Is it an actual legitimate business, or is it some fly-by-night? The more credible they are, the more expensive they're probably going to be, but you can know that you can trust them. What is their network of locations? Do they ship everywhere in the world or only to certain places? How do you get your product to them? Are they going to come and collect it from you? Or where is their warehouse, for example? What is the price? Of course, that's important. What sort of customer service levels do they have? Can you get hold of them at 3 a.m. because that's when your customer has contacted you and said, I was expecting the shipment and I still haven't got it? Their safety record. How safe is it to ship goods with this organization? What technology do they use? Are they using the latest? And is it compatible with any technology that you have? So you have automated processes, for example, for customer relationship management. Does it speak to the technology that these guys use? How efficient are they? And of course, what is their freight management capability? Thanks, Bill. I will have a look at that and get back to you with comments. So we've talked at some length about 3PL providers, but there is a step beyond 3PL, and I think it is important that you understand that that step exists. There's also 4PL. So a fourth-party logistics provider essentially takes third-party logistics a step further by managing resources, technology, infrastructure, and in fact, even managing 3PLs to design, build, and provide supply chain solutions for businesses. So 4PL doesn't just take charge of the logistics component of your business, they take charge of your entire supply chain. Now, for a small business, 4PL providers probably are not the way to go. But for larger businesses that would really just like to concentrate on the core business, which is producing, writing, manufacturing, providing services, etc., 4PL could be the way to go. And I really just want you to take note of the fact that they exist. Quite interestingly, UPS is offering 4PL services now and is actually very well regarded in that field. Now, of course, you've shipped your goods, you've managed to figure out how you're going to get them into the hands of your customer. Now you need to get paid, and that's a very important component of e-commerce. So in the time that we have left this afternoon, I want to focus on getting paid. Starting off with payment gateways, payment processors, and merchant accounts, and what is the difference between them. So payment gateway is really a sales terminal, like a cash register that you use in any brick and mortar store. Its function is to accept an online payment on your e-commerce site, and it acts like a mediator between the transaction on your website and the payment processor. So money comes into the till, and then money has to go into the bank. The information collected by the payment gateway is transferred to the payment processors, and these are the financial institutions that authorize the transaction and handle the movement of money. They exchange communication between the cardholder's bank and the merchant account. They verify the validity of the card, the funds available, they determine if monthly limits have been exceeded, and so on. And if everything is found to be legit, the payment processor authorizes the transfer of funds to the merchant account. And then the merchant account is a kind of bank account where the money of a successful transaction is deposited. A little bit different from normal bank accounts because you don't control this process. Once the money is deposited in your merchant account, the funds are then transferred into your official business account. So you've got 3 stages in the process of getting paid, and all 3 stages have to be in place and have to work in order for you to actually get the money. Now, you've got to choose the right payment gateway. And of course, before you can make that decision, you have to understand your buyers yet again. Just because you choose a payment gateway doesn't make it the right choice in your market. So let's look, for example, at PayPal. If you use PayPal and you want to sell into China, you're going to struggle because PayPal is barely used in China. You will almost certainly have to find another gateway like Alipay. Also, you need to make sure that the payment gateway you choose is compatible with your content management system. So depending on how you've designed your website, how you've built your website using whichever e-commerce platform, your payment gateway has to be compatible. So most e-commerce platforms like PrestaShop, Magento, and we've talked about Magento already, are usually compatible with the most important payment gateways, but you need to double check before you commit to using a payment gateway. Now, the top 5 payment gateways in use in Australia are the ones you see there. eWay, SecurePay, Square, which is certainly gaining a lot of popularity. It was quite problematic at the start. It was clunky. It didn't always work, but it's getting a lot better. WorldPay and PIN payments. And you may not have heard of some of those. That's because they work seamlessly. They sit behind the scenes and they do what they do without any rah-rah at all. You might want to make a note of the addresses there. If you go to any of those websites, you'll get a lot of information about those payment gateways. And again, the online course also contains a lot more information about payment gateways and getting paid.